Okay, good evening everyone. We're going to try something that maybe has never been tried before tonight. We're going to do exploratory surgery on ourselves to try and discover where is faith inside of us. Where does faith actually belong in the human person? What do we believe with? What do we use? What are the tools? What are the organs, the limbs? What makes us believe? Where is faith? And this is a topic that I think getting this clear and right will completely transform our view of what faith is. Because like many things, there's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings about it. And even the most basic thing, if you think about it, which is, what do we believe with? Where is faith inside of us? So we're going to try and open ourselves up, examine the various faculties within the human being, and see where faith fits in. See what we find. The premise of this journey of discovery, the assumption, the axiom is that faith is there. That faith is not something you need to find from somewhere or gain or be convinced of. Faith is something that you have. You need to just discover it, find it. And this is a basic premise of Kabbalistic thought, that you don't need to get a dose of faith. You don't need to be superimposed with faith. You don't need to find it somewhere outside of you. You need to find it in you. As we all probably could say from our personal experience, whether or not we have faith, whether we had faith and lost it, or didn't have it and gained it, anyone who goes on a faith journey will usually find that it wasn't an external thing that gave us faith. It was something that sparked within us. And that's because it was always there. We just need to find where it is. So looking at the human being, looking at ourselves and the way we function, so we have many different layers and levels to ourselves. And the way we experience or discover or have anything in our life could have many different sources within our own being. So let's go from the, I guess, most external and mundane and try and get deeper and deeper and try and find where faith fits in. So if I am, let's say, aware of something, if there is a person, a concept, an object, anything that I'm aware of, that I have a connection with, that I believe in, or it's a part of my worldview, I must have had some contact with it. There must have been some interaction with it. Just a simple example, that if I ask you, are you familiar with apples? So we're all familiar with apples. How? How did you get to know what an apple is? How do you know that apples exist? Well, we've experienced apples. That we know what apples look like. We've seen them. We've held them in our hand. We've bitten into them and digested them. We've experienced an apple. So I don't need to convince you that apples exist. It's something you've experienced yourself. How did you experience it? Through a direct connection with it. I could even tell you that there is an apple in the kitchen behind me. And you've never seen that apple. It's an amazing apple. You haven't seen this one. But let me tell you, there's an incredible apple in the kitchen behind me. And you can believe that, you can accept that. You've seen apples, you know what apples are. And so the fact that there's one in the kitchen that you haven't seen before is not so surprising. There are many apples around that you haven't seen. You haven't seen them all. So you can accept the idea that there's an apple in the kitchen behind me. No, there's nothing too earth-shattering about that at all. And so too with any other reality, any other thing that you have in your life, you know it exists even if it's not in front of you, because you experienced it. You've had a connection with it. Now, there are many different layers of experience. The most simple layer of experience is through the five senses. We have the sense of touch, of sight, of hearing, of smelling, of tasting. This is the most basic way we experience the reality around us. We become familiar with it, and we know what it is. Interestingly, the first sense, the most primary sense that we have is actually taste. That a baby, even before they're born, they taste their reality. Little babies put everything in their mouth. They pick up something, they put it straight into their mouth. There's a reason for that, because that's the way they connect with reality, by eating it, by tasting it. Even before their sight is fully developed. They hear stuff as well. They see, they feel, but taste is the most palpable. And when you've tasted something, you know it is, you know it exists. Seeing with your own eyes, hearing with your own ears, feeling with your hands, smelling a presence of something. Smelling is also a very important sense, and it goes very deep into our soul. Sometimes we don't even notice consciously the smell around us, but it imprints something in us. It can jog memories. The smell of your kindergarten, you still remember it when you smell it in a certain place. I remember the glue we used to use, and the smell of that glue that we did for our little arts and crafts and paper mache. That smell, if I smell it, I'm back in kindy. Doesn't matter how many years go by. The smell of a particular dish that our grandmother used to make. Whenever you smell that, you're back there, and she's there with you. Smell has an extremely deep connection to us. So this is that primary way that we experience the reality around us. Something exists in our life through our senses. We've seen it, we've heard it, we've tasted it, we've felt it, or we've smelt it. Is faith one of those senses? Do we experience God through any of those senses? Is God an existence in our consciousness, which is what faith means? God exists in our consciousness through any of the five senses? Well, I can only speak for myself, that I have never seen God that I know of, heard God, tasted, smelled, felt. I can't say that in my conscious mind, in my memory, I have experienced God in any of my five senses. So, unless you have, and maybe you have, if you have, then your faith would be based on your sight or smell. But I haven't. And so I can't say that faith has come to me through any of my senses, my five senses. Which means that from the point of view of my five senses, God doesn't exist. If I haven't seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or felt, then that thing from the point of view of my five senses has no existence. An apple exists because I've seen it. I felt it. It exists on the level of my five senses. But there are other things that exist, but not for my senses. There are things that do have a reality, but we don't experience them through our senses. What will be an example of that? Can you think of something that exists, but not experienced by our five senses? Electricity? Unless you get electrocuted. Yeah. We don't really see electricity. We see its results. We don't really see it.
Sound?
That we hear. Sound we hear, we don't see it.
Yeah.
So for our eye, sound doesn't exist, but for our ear it does. What doesn't exist for any of the senses? You can't hear, see, touch, smell, taste, but it exists.
Emotion.
An emotion. Great example. An emotion. Does love exist? Is there really love? Some doubt it, maybe. But we know there is. There's such a thing as love. It's one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It makes us do unbelievable things. Sometimes great things, sometimes ridiculous things, sometimes terrible things. But it has an unbelievable force. To deny the existence of love would be ridiculous. Love makes the world go round, to some extent. But you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. So then, how could it exist if you can't experience it with the five senses? Where does love exist? Where do we experience love? Love is an emotion. It's a feeling. And a feeling we experience in our heart. Even though scientists look at the heart as being merely a pump, to pump blood around, the Kabbalists look at it as being the center of emotion. We may be aware of our emotions in our brain. The brain interprets, identifies the emotion, but where it's happening is in our heart. Which is why, when you get excited, your heart beats faster. When you get a fright, you miss a beat. The emotional response is in the heart. The experience of it, the interpretation of it is in the brain. The awareness of it is in the brain. But it's the heart that's actually experiencing it.
Or the stomach.
Sometimes the gut. Mm-hmm. So love, the feeling of love, is experienced in our heart, in our emotions. When we feel a sense of love, the Kabbalists have a fascinating definition of love. That what does love mean? Love is the desire to bridge a gap. That when I love somebody, I want the gap between us to be bridged, to be minimized. I want to be closer. So it hurts me that you're far away. It pains me if we're not understanding each other. If we're not aligned, if we're not in tune with each other. If my loved one is ignoring me, so then there's a distance which I can't stand. The love is the desire to bridge that gap. That there shouldn't be a gap between us. That we should be aligned. And that I feel in my heart. It's a deep feeling in my heart that is pushing me towards that person. My experience of love is an experience of my emotions. When I feel that feeling, I know it is. I know it's there. So maybe I can't touch love or see it, but I know love exists because I feel it in my heart. And that's another sense, not a physical sense, like the five senses. We're talking about now an emotional sense. Is that where faith is? Is faith an emotion? Is it a feeling? Do we connect with God's reality through our heart, through a sense of feeling?
Yeah, I agree, it would be.
So it definitely seems to be quite an emotional thing. Why? Why is it emotion? Why do we connect with God through emotion? What's emotional about it? Why would it be with the heart?
We desire a relationship. We desire outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Connection.
So we want connection, we want relationship, closeness.
That follows narrowing the gap we spoke of before.
We want to narrow the gap between us and God. So many do explain faith as being an emotion. Perhaps because of it's an irrational thing. It's not logical, so it's emotional.
that just like love is not rational, people love sometimes in ridiculous ways. People become caught up in relationships with other people that are just so wrong. They're not good for you, it's not good for them, it's not gonna make sense, it's only gonna hurt in the end. Like everyone can see it, that it's a bad idea, except the person in it who's in love, because they're in an irrational state, they're in an emotional state. So no convincing is going to change their mind. They're in love. So to the other way, if you don't love someone, if you just don't feel the love for somebody, trying to convince you to love them is not going to work. I can't bring all these proofs why this person is so lovable. You should love this person. That's not going to do it. Either I love them or I don't love them. You can't push an emotion, you can't force it. Which again implies this sort of irrationality. You can give me all the arguments in the world why I should love somebody. It's not going to make me love them. You can give me all the arguments in the world why I shouldn't love somebody. It's not going to make me stop loving them. Because it's not rational, it's an emotion. An emotion doesn't have perspective, doesn't have logic, doesn't have arguments. So that sounds like faith might fit into that. If somebody has faith, doesn't matter, all the logical arguments in the world will not shake that faith. If somebody doesn't have it, all the convincing in the world is not going to give it to them. Either you got it or you don't got it. That's how it would seem that faith is. And so many have understood faith as being an emotional thing. And they look at those that have faith as having an emotional connection to something, which is irrational and you can't convince them out of it, or somebody who doesn't have it as just being more rational sometimes. I'm a logical person. I don't have faith because I'm scientific. The problem with that is to say that our relationship with God is an emotional relationship, purely an emotional relationship, is difficult because the nature of emotions are that even though emotions are irrational, you cannot have an emotion towards someone or something without having an intellectual awareness of it. An emotion cannot start purely in the heart. It has to start in the mind and then continue into the heart. You cannot have feelings towards someone who you don't know. And when I say don't know, you have no awareness of their existence. You don't walk around saying, I'm in love. I just don't know who to. There's somebody out there that I'm madly in love. I just don't know who it is.
Well, you can say that.
Well, you can. You can, but it'd be a bit of a worry. If you'd walk around saying that, we'd be concerned. I mean, you can say, find me somebody to love, but that's not loving somebody. It's not find me the somebody that I love. Somebody to love means I've got love in my heart. I've got the capacity for love. I just need to unleash it on somebody. I need to find the person who I can share it with. That's one thing. That's the capacity to love. But to say I love someone, I'm just not sure who it is. And I'm waiting to find out. That makes no sense. Love has to be directed at a person that you have an awareness of their existence. You may have a very peripheral, superficial awareness of their existence. And then maybe we'd call it a crush or some other thing that rather than love. But we don't always differentiate. You can have feelings towards somebody that you don't really know. You could fall in love with an imaginary character that you made up in your mind, which unfortunately people do that quite often, and makes it very hard for real people to enter their lives, because the imaginary person that you came up with is better than anybody you'll ever meet. Nobody else can really measure up to them. So you can create a figment, of the Mr. or Mrs. Right that you have feelings towards, you fall in love with, but that's still a being, one of your imagination, but a being. You can also create imaginary stories behind people. Somebody who you see on the train, you can create an entire story of who that person is and fall in love with that image of them that you created. But there has to be some basis in reality. There has to be an awareness of that person, of that being. Therefore, if faith is an emotion, a feeling towards God, we have a feeling that He's out there, that He's there, and we have this sense of wanting this closeness with Him, a desire to connect with Him, that has to come first in our minds. It has to start in our minds, an awareness of Him. It couldn't start in the world of emotions. And if that's the case, so then we're saying we can't feel God with our hands, see Him with our eyes, hear Him with our ears, but that we can't, or we haven't. We have a feeling in our heart towards God, but that can't be the source of faith. That can't be where faith is. It has to begin higher than that in the brain. There must be an awareness of Him in our mind that causes a yearning in the heart. Which would imply that faith starts in the brain. But let's analyze that. If faith is in the brain, so how does the brain work? If emotion is our feeling towards something, to either come close to it in the case of love, to avoid it in the case of fear, but it's our interaction, our movement towards or in relation to another being. If that's where emotion is, what is intellect? So intellect, from the Kabbalistic perspective, is higher than emotion, deeper than emotion, in that intellect has the ability to connect with a reality that is completely outside of my orbit. An emotion I can only have towards a being that I'm aware of. An awareness I can have of a being that I've never seen or never experienced. In my mind, I can develop an appreciation for something that is theoretical. I can make up a person in my mind. I can make up a concept. I can invent a story. My mind is not limited to direct experience. I don't have to only think of things that I've thought of before or that I've seen before. That's the whole power of invention, of creativity, is to expand the horizons. So our mind can go beyond the limitations of where we are. My 5 senses can only experience something that is immediate. I can only taste or feel or see or hear something that's right in front of me. My emotions can take me further than that. I can have feelings towards someone who is not in front of me, who is far away, and my feelings are deeper the further they are sometimes. My mind can go even further than that. It can relate to something that I've never seen before, I have no connection with. I can, in my mind, imagine, fathom, understand, appreciate a concept that I've never seen, never heard, never had any interaction with. This could be not a divine thing, not God. It could be a person as well. You could tell me about a person that I've never met and describe that person to me. Someone who you know very well, but I've never met them. And if you're good at describing and I'm good at listening, I could conjure a real sense of who that person is. My mind is able to do that. And with that, I could actually develop a feeling towards that person. I've never met them, but your description has created a certain reality in my mind, and I can now picture them, get a sense of them with my mind, and then my heart could actually develop an emotional bias towards them or against them, based on your description and my interpretation of it. So my mind has the power to connect to a reality that's totally beyond me. So therefore, it would seem in our exploratory surgery here, we're trying to place where faith comes in our personality. Well, it can't really be in the five senses, because God, most of us have to say that we've not seen or heard or felt, in the tangible sense, felt God. So in the realm of emotions, you can have an emotion towards God, but to say that's where faith belongs, that's where faith is, well, you can't have an emotion towards someone who you don't have an awareness of. It must come from the mind. And the mind seems the best candidate to be the home of faith, because the mind is capable of experiencing a reality that is beyond our immediate surroundings. And so God, who cannot be physically seen, would be able to be perceived, it would seem, by the brain, by our mind. And so therefore, maybe faith is a philosophy. It's a thought process. It's a mindset. It's an idea. And our connection with God is an intellectual connection, which then translates into an emotion. I become passionate about my faith, but that's because in my mind I've developed a picture, a vision, a sense of God. But that's also a bit problematic, because the mind, the way the mind works, is that for something to be real for the mind, the brain has to be able to define that thing. The only way that our mind can really grasp any idea is by grasping its edges, its limitations, its parameters. Let me explain, and let's analyze this power of the mind. When you're introduced a new concept, whether it be a mathematical equation or a philosophy or instructions on how to work your phone, any idea that you're given, the idea only becomes yours, it only becomes clear in your mind when that idea has become defined. So when you first learned the times table, so a kid looking at a times table with these numbers on it, what does this mean? That the numbers are familiar, but what does it all mean? Only when the child is taught that there's an idea of multiplication, where 1 times 1 is 1, meaning when you have only one, you're left with 1. But 2 times 1 means where you have 2 ones, it becomes 2. And they'll probably go back to the apples as the illustration. And I've got 1 apple, so 1 times 1 apple is just 1. But if I have 2 times 1 apples, I have 1 here and 1 there, so that's 2. And 3 times 1 is when I have 3 apples, so that's 3 times an apple, so I've got 3. And then it gets more complicated when you get to the 2 times table and the 3, etc. These are all concepts. The concept has to be defined, it has to be clarified, it has to be concretized. The reason why we use apples is because 1 is actually quite an abstract concept. One what? Just one, the number one. Number one is abstract, but one apple is concrete. Okay, I understand that. 2 apples, okay, I get it. But 2, that had to be explained. It's just a word, it's just a sound. Kids learn to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, they don't know what they're saying. But then they start counting things, and even they still don't know what they're saying. But eventually the idea comes that these numbers represent a concept, a totally abstract concept called 3. But when you apply it to 3 objects, it becomes a concrete concept that a child can understand. And 3 is not 4. So when the child turns 4, I'm not 3 anymore, I'm 4 now. I know what it is, I know what it isn't. And these ideas become a reality that you can use, that you can connect with. So for the mind to connect to something, for something to be real for the mind, it has to have definition. 3 means something, 4 means something, an apple means something, and an orange means something. There's something that it is, something that it isn't. There's a certain size to it, there's a shape to it. Whether it be a physical object like an orange or a concept like a number, but it has a definition. If something is undefined, the mind cannot connect to it. The less defined something is, the harder it is for the mind to connect to. And if there's no definition to it whatsoever, the mind cannot connect to it. So, the number 3 and the number 4, we get it. The number infinity is not really a number. It's not really something that we really get. We can use the word infinity. And we know what we're talking about, but we don't really, because we cannot define infinity. We can say what it's not. Infinity is a negative. It's not finite. No end. But we can't say what it is. We can't define what is infinity. So it's a term we can use, but our brain cannot actually fathom it. Same as nothingness that we were speaking about last week. Before the world was created, there was nothing. Before the universe, before creation, there was nothing. What does that mean? So if we imagine what there was, we imagine black. There's big blackness. But that's not nothing. That's something. That's blackness. What about nothing? Imagine nothing. Can you think about nothing? I think some people can, but not everyone. To really think about nothing? Like, we can't fathom absolute nothingness. So we can use words, we can say the terms, but we can't fathom because there's no definition. What's nothing? It's nothing. If there's nothing that you can describe it with, then there's nothing that my brain can capture, so I can't understand it. If you tell me it's black, so I've got a color now. If you tell me it's big or it's small, it's heavy, it's dark, these are all descriptions. I can start to make a picture. And the more description you give, the better my picture will be. But if you can't say anything about it, if there's no description, then my mind cannot grasp it. This is true more than anything else about God. There's no description of God. There's nothing we can say that he is. We can say he's infinite, he's not finite. Endless, but there's nothing we can describe him as. Which means that there's nothing that the mind can grasp onto to relate to God. So we can use a term, we can say a name, but to say that our brain actually conceptualizes God to the point where God is real to us, so real that we can actually have an emotion, a feeling towards God, That's not possible. Logically, that's not possible. Because the mind cannot relate to something that is indefinable. It's not that we don't know God's definition. He cannot be defined. Which even itself is not a definition. To say something cannot be defined is just saying what it's not. There's not enough there to grasp in our mind. It's like saying, how do you feel about infinity? How does infinity make you feel? You have a feeling about infinity? It's not something I can relate to have a feeling. How do you feel about nothingness? Like, it's absurd language. So to have a feeling about God, who we cannot define with our mind, it seems like a fruitless discussion. But the fact is, we see people are very passionate about God, one way or the other, for or against. But God elicits extreme emotion, which is a bit surprising. A being that cannot be defined, that cannot be experienced, should make people devote their entire lives to his cause? Like, how did that happen? If it's not coming from our senses, if faith is not something that we feel with our physical senses, if it's not coming from our heart, it's just an inner feeling, or from our mind, because we can't conceptualize God, so where are we left? Where could faith be coming from? We've run out of options. I'll share with you a fascinating teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the great mystic of our times. He said that faith is not coming from our senses, it's not coming from our emotions, it's not coming from our mind either. Faith is coming from God. Faith is not us experiencing something of ourselves. Faith is us experiencing God. So therefore, a moment of faith is a moment of experiencing God, not you. It's not coming from any part of you. You're not experiencing it in any particular faculty that you have. It is an experience, it's a moment where there's God, not you. What does that mean? That indeed, as long as you are feeling you, as long as you're experiencing self, so then that's what you're experiencing, self. And that self is limited, is finite, and is you. To experience God cannot be through experiencing self. You're in the way of that. You can't make it. You can't make God happen. You're in the way of God. It's only when you transcend self, that's when you experience God, and that's what faith is, an experience of God. Meaning, if I'm using my five senses, well, that's me using my finite antennae to experience a finite world. If I'm stuck in my emotions, that's again using my limited emotions to experience what is in my reality. If I'm stuck in my own brain, I'm using the finite faculties that I have in my intellect to experience the world as far as my brain can take me. But it's all limited. And God is unlimited. So to experience God, it can't be through any of those faculties. It has to be through transcending those faculties. It has to be something higher and deeper than those faculties. Something that is infinite. And that's God. So if you've experienced God, it's not through your mind or your heart or your senses. It's through God. What does that mean? It still sounds quite abstract. So if we look at faith experiences, I guess it's good to look at people who come to faith, who gain faith. What triggers that? How does that usually happen? Most of the time, it's through some type of shake-up of a person's reality. It can be through amazingly good things happening in someone's life, or sometimes, sadly, the opposite. Very difficult things happening in someone's life. But either way, it has to be where the reality that was gets lost, and there's a new reality that has to be faced. And when a person is going through that shake-up, that's very often where somebody finds faith. Either because so many amazing things are going on that they feel there's some higher power that has blessed them, and they thank God. Or, sadly, when things are not going as they would like, and somebody's facing adversity and difficulty, when the comfortable reality that was has become shattered, it's at that time when people turn to God and develop a relationship with Him. Either way, there's a certain vulnerability that has to be experienced for God to be there. As long as I'm full of myself, as long as I'm full of me, so then I'm blocking the God reality from being a part of my awareness, because I'm full of me. When the me gets shaken a little bit, then there's an openness for the God reality to shine, and I experience that. Not with my senses, not with my heart, not with my mind. It's just God. God is there. In other words, to experience God means to be humble enough to make room in self for God to be there. Because God is everywhere. There's nowhere that God isn't. But if we're in the way, we're not going to experience that. We're not going to experience God's presence. As soon as we get out of the way, God is just there. It's interesting, they say that the opposite of faith in God is not atheism. It's arrogance. Because somebody is the highest being in the universe. There's got to be somebody who's the highest being in the universe for you. And it really boils down to a choice of probably two. It's either God or you. Because you probably don't worship another person. Your primary sense of reality can't be somebody else. If you're a sane person, your primary reality is self. That's who we look after first. And so either the primary reality in the universe is me or somebody else. And it's probably not another person, because why is that any different to me? It's either God or me. So either I'm completely arrogant, or I'm only a little bit arrogant, or I'm a bit arrogant here and a bit not arrogant. Everyone has their level of arrogance, of self-centeredness. The more space I make in my arrogance, the more space there is for the divine reality to come in. This doesn't mean that all believers are humble or all non-believers are arrogant. It doesn't work that way. There are plenty of people who believe in God and are quite arrogant. There are plenty of people who don't believe and who are quite humble. But between me and God, whether it's about me or about him, that's the real competition. And my ability to have faith is my ability to put myself aside and open up to something higher. To be humble that I'm not the center of the universe, God is, and I'm honored to be a part of that. It's interesting, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the author of Tanya, he writes that an interesting thing is that children don't have any problem with faith. It's very easy to explain God to kids. You just say it as it is, that God created us. He created everything. He's everywhere. He always was and always will be. And that's totally fine. Adults get stuck in these concepts, but kids don't. Kids take to faith very easily. So you could explain that as being, well, they're kids. They're immature. They're gullible. They believe in the tooth fairy too. But the tooth fairy they only believe in if you put money under the pillow. They need some evidence of the tooth fairy. God, they don't need any evidence, no proof, no bribery. Just tell them and they get it. So it's not because they're gullible. It's because they're more simple, and simplicity is closer to God than sophistication. Sophistication is being complicated. And God is simple. He's the simplest reality. He just is. So the closer you are to simplicity, the more open you are to God. The more complicated you get, the more stuck in yourself you become. Then you're not open to God. So the reason why kids believe is because God is revealed everywhere. He just is. It's only when we start becoming complicated that we don't see that as an obvious reality. For a child, it's just obvious. It just is. Because a child has that openness. So here's a thought. Here's an exercise. When searching for faith, when trying to connect with faith, when trying to have a relationship with God, when trying to strengthen ourselves with faith. So the classic way of doing that has been it's a search. We're going out to search. We need to go up on a mountain somewhere, or find God somewhere out there. But the Kabbalistic view is no. God is right here and everywhere, and totally available, and totally close to you, and faith you have already. You just need to uncover it. So instead of going somewhere to find faith, try this. Try quietening everything else, particularly your own inner voice. Quieten, even the search for God has to be quietened. Shut that off and just let him in. Be vulnerable enough to just let yourself go and let him in. And when you do that, faith just appears because it was always there. we so often have such a strong grip on our lives, or we think we do. We think that we have such control, or we need to have such control over everything that's going on. And if I let go of that grip, everything's going to fall apart. If I don't keep holding on, if I don't keep pulling the reins, so then it's all going to fall apart. And that facade of control, that false view that we have this control over what's going on, is such a cause of stress, because we feel this responsibility on our shoulders that the world's going to fall apart if I'm not in total control of it, that everyone around me is going to fall apart, and I'm going to fall apart, and my life and everything is going to completely collapse because I need to be in control of it all. And it's such a source of frustration, because in reality we're so not in control that everything that we're trying to control is not working out as it's supposed to. All the people around us are not saying what we want them to say, and the world is not responding the way we want it to respond, and we think so we need to work harder to grab hold, to get it, to shape it the way we think it should be. It's exhausting. So if instead we let go of all that and said, actually, God is in control. I'm not the primary existence in the universe, God is. I am an integral part of His universe, but it's His universe. It's His world. And I have to do my thing. I have to make my effort. I have to do my work. I have to do my part in the world. But I don't control it. I don't control the world. God does. And if I can be okay with that, if I can be at peace with that, then I've found faith. And you can almost visualize this extremely heavy burden lifting off your shoulders. I don't have to carry the world on my shoulders. God is doing that. I don't even have to carry myself on my shoulders. I have to make my choices. I have to do what I need to do. I'm responsible for my choices, but I don't control the outcomes. That is the humility and the vulnerability that we create, an openness for God to be there. And that's where we have faith. This is the meaning of what the Rebbe taught, that faith is not in our senses, is not in our heart, is not in our mind. Faith is God. It's not us doing it, it's God doing it. And all we need to experience that is to just move ourselves out of the way, and it'll be there. And really what I'm talking about is experiencing our soul. Experiencing God is experiencing our soul, because our soul is a piece of God. Our soul is the part of us that is godly. And so when we're in tune with that, when we let that part of ourselves shine, that's when we're connected to God. And then faith is just a given, it's just an obvious reality. Like a kid who knows that God just is. Okay, any questions or comments?
Well, I found it interesting you talking back earlier about the heart. More recently they found people who do literally die of a broken heart, and they found chemical reactions, especially spouses who are dying close together in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
The process you described of letting God into yourself through blocking out all the other noise sounded like a meditation.
Mm-hmm.
What do the Kabbalists have to say relating to meditation?
Well, meditation and prayer are very deeply connected, and the concept of prayer is similar to meditation and similar to what I was describing of blocking out, is that you just let the words of the prayer book speak through you. That the idea of prayer is that the words are divine words in the prayer book. It's what our soul is saying, and so we just let it be said. So it's almost like to be the Hebrew word to pray is lehitpalel, which is grammatically it really means to be prayed. You're being prayed. You're not praying. You're not doing something. You're being prayed. You're letting yourself be prayed. So, I guess a directed meditation would be the same thing. Not a meditation to clear your mind of all thought and to relax, but actually focus on a divine concept and let everything else fall away. And the reason why that's so hard, prayer is considered the hardest thing, because it's so threatening. It's like putting myself aside. It's not asserting myself, it's opening myself. That is a very hard thing to do, which is why our mind wanders when we pray. That we think we get distracted very easily. It's hard to focus, and that's because our more animalistic side is feeling quite threatened. Our ego is feeling quite threatened by prayer, because prayer is opening up to a higher being. But it's very powerful, and that's the power of it. So I think that it's a quiet moment. That's the idea of prayer, to have a quiet moment where you're just letting your soul speak. And that can be the formal prayers in the prayer books, or it can be your own personal meditation where you just connect to God, but by opening up.
Rabbi, I understand what you've explained about allowing yourself to be vulnerable and opening up. But what about the concept, which you touched on earlier, of intellectually needing to have an understanding or knowledge or experience of somebody, a being, to be able to emotionally feel that love?
Mm-hmm.
Don't we also intellectually study the teachings and the traditions,
Mm-hmm.
and then emotionally fall in love with those
Mm-hmm.
part of our Jewish upbringing,
Yeah.
and the Torah and all the lessons and laws and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and then look at that and say, well, that's something that we can attach ourselves to,
Yes.
therefore we love that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that experience that gives us.
Yeah. Very good point.
So how does that compare with what the Rebbe has explained
Okay.
that God is?
It's a great question and a very good point. So, faith alone, if we just have faith, it's quite vague. It's quite removed from reality. You can have faith, and that doesn't actually impact your life. It does make you a better person. You could sit and meditate, as we just described, and open yourself up and feel that connectedness, and it could be quite relaxing, maybe peaceful, but it won't necessarily impact your life, because if you're experiencing God, then it's not you, and if it's not you, so then what do you come away with? You've got to go back to being you afterwards. You can't meditate all day, because then what good are you doing? What's the purpose of such a thing? So faith has to be brought down into mind, into heart, even into our senses. It's not enough to have faith in the soul. faith has to permeate the brain, the heart, and even the five senses. How to do that and what that is, that's the topic of our next week's lecture. To take that faith and to actualize it. Not to leave it in the soul, but to move it on. That we'll discuss at length next week. Because without that, faith would be just a nice idea. If it doesn't impact our life. So stay tuned for that.
Because you're using the word, we're experiencing faith. So we actually are experiencing it. So it is in our senses to some degree.
Well, it's a God experience. Like it's a moment where we opened up and God was there. But the problem is we then close again. We then come back.
Our experience.
Yeah, but how do you take it with you? How do you take it with you in your daily life?
What do you do with it?
Yeah. Because if the only way to experience God is by negating myself, then what happens when myself comes back? There's no God left. So it's like a catch-22. You want to experience God, so get out of the way. Okay, but if I'm out of the way, there's no me. So then, how does that impact my tomorrow, my today? Like, it would seem, based just on what we said tonight, that it's either or. Either in the God space, where your ego's out of the way, or you're in your ego space where God is not there. And if that's the case, so then what's our purpose? Should we be just these egoless beings? That means meditating all day. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? It doesn't seem to be the purpose, because that's not what we do. How do I take this idea and it affect me at work, or in my family life, or in the way I interact with human beings? That we have to deal with at length. Because otherwise you can have faith and be a not nice person. And that's not nice. That'll be next week, please God.
Do you really have nothing in the kitchen?
You want one? Did you believe it?
I'm emotionally attached.
That's the topic for the week after. We'll take the apples out. All right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.